All right, so this is actually my second take for the review of the Elex. Just because the first time around, I feel like I didn't really get my point across. So I'm not going to release take one on the channel, obviously, because I don't feel like it's worth watching, frankly. So here's the take two. We got the Focal Elex right here. This is an offering from Focal, of course, French manufacturer, and Massdrop. So Focal used to make, they specialize in loudspeakers and pretty much car audio. They had never really gotten into the world of headphones until a few years ago. Now they have a handful of headphones that you can pick from, a variety ranging from about high-end to all the way like Summit Fi, straight up Summit Fi. And their offerings are, well, they're kind of interesting, especially since they're the new kid on the block. So let's see what they can offer us, right? Anyways, this is the Focal Elex. When it arrives, it comes in this box right here. Straight up. There's no outer shell or anything. It's just the box. You open it up, and it looks real nice. It looks like a very nice display box. Very nice. It's got this sound isolation right there. Got the headphones, the manual, and this right here underneath this is where the cables are stored when you receive them. Now, this box is all right. It's decent, but if you want to use this as a display box, it does have some issues. First and foremost, if you try to leave these with the cable plugged in, you're gonna have to remove this right here, and it's pretty much gonna look like that. So that's the first issue right off the bat right there. You can do that, and that's perfectly fine if you want to go ahead and stuff the cable inside, but me personally, I just leave it hanging out of the box and then bring the connector that goes into the amp back here and then store it in there. So you just have some of the cable running out. Second of all, this thing right here in the middle, if you're planning on taking out the headphones or putting them back in, guess what? It comes off. It comes off with the headphones themselves. So, well, maybe for display purposes, this might look interesting, but it's not very functional. So you basically strip down the box for every little good thing it has to actually be able to use it instead. So it's kind of worthless, but it's still all right. It's a decent offering. Now, these are the headphones themselves, the Focal Elex. As you can see, they are completely matte black. They're very subdued, very minimalistic. Now, of course, at first I wasn't a big fan of this look, but, kind of changed my mind over time, and now I think they look very minimalistic and sleek. They look very nice for sure. So I changed my mind. I came around to these. Very interesting look. Now the build of these, it's quite good actually. It's made out of metal mostly, so you're gonna have no issues whatsoever with it. It's gonna be, well, at the very least, that's the way it's looking. It's very nice metal. The majority of it is metal. The pads are like a felt fenestrated material. I think it's like Alcantara, but quote unquote. And the headband itself is very, very nice and plush as well. It does creak a little when you move them. Let's see if you can hear it. It does creak a little bit, but it's not a problem when you're wearing them or when you're using them. They do not creak that way whatsoever. I do want to point out that when my unit arrived, it already came with this little chip right there. If you see that right there in the top right corner of the hole, the connector hole, it came with that little chip. It's not an issue functionally whatsoever, and they've had no issues. But I do want to point it out that they came that way brand new, straight out of the factory. So just a little thing to note there. What else? Now let's jump into the comfort here. Oh, sorry, no. As far as build quality, the cables, they look awesome, but in reality, they feel terrible. Now, thankfully, mine are functional, even though there have been rumors that they start failing after about 5 weeks, give or take, sometimes even after 5 days. But as far as my cables have gone, I have had no issues of the sort, and thankfully. But it doesn't matter because they're just very, very hard. They're just difficult to use. They're very uncomfortable. They're very, very stiff. They hold their shape, and they're about 2 meters long, just about 2 meters long. So it's just about enough for you to be sitting down at your desk and have these slightly dangling, but they don't necessarily dangle because they're too stiff. they just kind of form like a weird arc and then go up to your head. It's unfortunate, it really is, because they look amazing, but they don't function that well. Now let's jump into the comfort here, and this is by far the worst part of the headphone. They are one of the least comfortable headphones I've ever worn. I'm just going to put it out there. They really are. And that's very, very, very sad because, well, I'll get to the sound in a bit. But yeah, imagine the HD600 line, brand new out of the box. Now imagine a shorter cup because they're not as tall as this. Imagine a slightly stronger clamp force, slightly. And then on top of that, add the weight of these. Because they're metal, they do weigh more than average, but they're not exactly like Audeze levels either. So there is that possibility. I mean, there is that factor to consider, which is really unfortunate because they're great. They're great, you know. But we'll get to that in a bit. The pads, whenever I was taking them off and putting them back on, they snagged my hair every now and then. I want to say it's because of the fenestration, but I can't really say for sure. But I just had to point that out just so it's out there on the table. You know what's going on. What else? There weren't really any hot spots at all. And I did try using bookcase method to see if they happen to get a little more loose. But here's my experience with them. You put them on, they feel all right. A bit on the tighter side and a bit on the heavier side, but they definitely don't feel terrible. 30 minutes later, you're going to want to start wanting to take them off because they're clamping down on your head and it's just, it hurts. It hurts a bit. After bookcase method, the same thing happened, except it hurt a little less. But I still wanted to take them off regardless because they just weren't that comfortable. So, I mean, ruined by the comfort, but we'll get to that. Sound. The bass is rich. It is thick. It is incredibly, incredibly detailed and textured. I mean, it is amazing bass. It really is. What else can I say about the bass? This has some super low extension. I mean, like ridiculously low, especially for a dynamic headphone. Sure, they still roll off, but the point at which they roll off is so low that it's very comparable to a planar. Sure, planars are their own thing, obviously, but it really does get low. It really does get low on the bass. It's very, very interesting. The amount of bass they have, however, is on the enjoyable side, definitely on the fun side, but I wouldn't say, like in about 5% of cases, the amount of meatiness on the bass gets a little too thick for my enjoyment. Now, keep in mind the majority of headphones that I've bought and kept for myself because I like their sound are like bass light or closer to bass light, not bass heavy or slightly above neutral. They are on the bass light side, so keep that in mind. But these for me, 5% of the time got a little too overwhelming on that bass. I'll give you an example. Tuyo, which is the Narcos theme by, goodness, I don't want to get this wrong here. Of course I didn't. Oh, by Rodrigo Amarante. There you go. Thank you, Rodrigo. So yeah, the bass in that track, the lower end, got a little too overwhelming for my taste. They were just a little too much. Now, you have an example. The World by Nightmare. That is the intro to Death Note. Yes, I know anime. I'm a weeb. The bass guitar there is a little more on the overpronounced side. Not extremely, but it is up there, which is common among the J-rock genre. They bring out the bass guitar a little more, which isn't bad on neutral to bass light headphones. It's enjoyable, and you can hear the bass guitar pop out between all the other instruments. But in headphones like these, it's a little too overwhelming. It really is. I'll get to EQ later on, but yeah, stock, it's just a little too overwhelming in 5% of the tracks I listen to. What else about the bass? The mids are slightly laid back. They're definitely not the main headline here, especially vocals. They're just not. But they have enough separation and detail so that they're very distinguishable and very easy to point out, despite the fact that they're not so forward here. They're actually a little more laid back. The lower notes of the electric guitar kind of get pushed into the background, but they're easy to identify due to the cleanliness. The acoustic guitar in Tank, which by the seatbelts, and yes, intro to Cowboy Bebop, it never disappears in the rear right corner of the frequency. The rear right corner of the soundstage in the imaging. It never disappears, unlike with other headphones where it doesn't completely disappear, but it just fades into the back and just becomes part of the background as opposed to standing out on its own. So these do an excellent job at that. Very, very impressive. Now we get to the highs. The highs on this headphone they're perfect. No, they're not perfect. They're close to perfect. And what I mean by that is in levels. They're not so bright to call this like a super bright headphone and sibilant and whatever, but they're not dark either. They're above neutral, but they just give you enough sparkle and shine to wow you, but never enough to overwhelm you, in my opinion at least. They're very, very, very clear, very detailed. They give you what you want, but without being pushed forward and in your face either, with the exception of a bit of a peak in 10K. But the peak, in my opinion, does not get overwhelming either, so it's not a huge deal. What else do we got? The timbre and the treble, because of that 10K peak and everything else, I want to say really reminds me of planars that I've heard, like some Audezes, some Hifimans, that they have kind of a little bit of a peak in the treble, but it's not bad. It's that kind of silvery treble that you get from planars. Very, very similar to that, actually. Now, we get to the single-ended versus balanced. Please do yourself a favor and run these balanced, because single-ended, the soundstage sounds very basic. They sound extremely, just uninteresting. And I'm not talking about how much bass or treble there is. It's just more about the overall presentation of the sounds that these reproduce. They just don't make you want to listen to them off of single-ended. And like I said, the imaging is much more simple as well. So you run these balanced on the flip side, you get an entirely different headphone. You get something that's vibrant and alive and just beautiful, and it presents everything with energy and just bliss, pure bliss. Also, let's say the soundstage separation was more like 3-stage, right? You had forward, left, and right. Now with these, it's like buying the DLC for a game. Now you can access all of the areas. So you have forward, left and right, rear left, and rear right, which is just, it really brings out extra detail and separation in the music that you don't get from single-ended at all. You just don't. So strongly recommend you run these off of balanced. Like, for example, the song Tank by the Seatbelts. With that particular track, like I said, the acoustic guitar never gets lost in the back. That only occurs in balanced. In single-ended, it's still there, but it's not quite as clear. It doesn't have its own space to breathe, and it becomes part of everything else as well. So don't run these single-ended. Soundstage, it is a bit on the narrow side regardless of single-ended versus balanced. It just is. But it is definitely not on the claustrophobic side like the HT600 line is either. It definitely has its own space to breathe. It's got its own area, and there's no issues at all whatsoever. At first, it might sound a bit like a bubble, kind of like the Sennheiser HD5 line sounds, where you have this kind of weird bubble kind of imaging around your head. It's kind of similar with these, but the more you use them, the more it just sounds normal to you. It does not sound like a slightly wonky sound to me. By the way, I should mention burn-in is mandatory with these. If you don't believe in burn-in, good for you, but I strongly advise you to give these 20 to 30 minutes of playing sound or pink noise or whatever you want before you actually judge these, because the first time I put them on, and I just put them on straight out of the box just to plug them in, because I was curious. But I wasn't going to judge them like that. I just said, well, let's see what they sound like. They were ridiculously bad. I could not believe what people said about these, and I was just thinking about how I was ready to rip them a new one in this review with the sound. But then I let them play out, and I didn't use them at all. And then I came back to them. They were an entirely different headphone. I mean, these things, they need the burn-in. Just trust me on that. Even if you don't believe in burn-in, if you want to be absolutely sure, trust me and wait. Now, as far as the amping goes on these, I was running them at 11 a.m. at gain 3 single-ended on the AAA 789. And through balanced, I was running them gain 2 at 9 a.m. But the volume varied because these are extremely dynamic, by the way. What other reviewers have said is indeed correct. These, depending on the track, can get very loud, like to the point where you don't realize it and you're like, oh no, I need to turn this down. This isn't correct. Or you just have to bring it up a little bit else on the quieter tracks. You just do. So what are we getting to? Imaging. Amazing for the price. These things absolutely knock it out of the park for $600 with the imaging. Very, very 3D, very impressive. I mean, not only can you hear where an instrument is and where it is the next, like you don't just hear the instrument go here and here, you hear it leaves behind like a footstep of sorts as it travels from here to here. It's just absolutely impressive what these can do with the imaging. Super, super detailed and incredible. So now we get to the conclusion. Goddamn. Elex and Focal, Jesus, it happened again. Focal and Mass Drop, or should I say Drop, really knocked it out of the park with these in the sound department. And believe me, I would have kept these despite their intense sound and despite the slight bassiness of them, because they're really they're performance kings. They really are. But why didn't I keep them? Or, well, I'll get to why I didn't keep them later on in upcoming comparisons with the 600 and the 800. But anyways, I would have kept these in my collection, but I can't, because the sound's a little muddy. I mean, not muddy. The sound is a little too meaty on the bass side, which can be fixed with EQ. I'll leave my EQ settings down below so you can go ahead and, test that out for yourself and see whether you like that or not, which I think fixes the meatiness for the majority of cases, but there's still a bit of meatiness left over, which I still don't like, but it's much more manageable than the stock frequency of the bass in these. Anyways, that can be fixed. It can be fixed. But what cannot be fixed is the comfort. Despite the bookcase method, despite trying to get used to them, despite trying my absolute hardest to love these, I can't. I couldn't get used to these at all. I just couldn't. The comfort is just, it's too lacking. And I find it troubling to spend $600+ on a headphone like this for me to put them on for 30 to 45 minutes and then have to take them off and put on a different pair of headphones. That for me is a no-no. And I don't know about you, but look, if I had all the money in the world, I'd be like, yeah, I'll enjoy these for 30 minutes and then I'll enjoy my other end games for 30 minutes as well and listen to those for the rest of the time. Fantastic if you can do that. And it's not about just being able to do that, but it's more about thinking a little more reasonably. Like, really? You're going to spend $600 on a headphone that you can only use for like 30 minutes a day? That doesn't make sense to me. So, Focal, fantastic. You're doing amazing work on the sound quality. Can be a little bit tweaked here and there just to sound a little more neutral, but I'll leave that up to you guys. But the comfort department, you guys really need to make some tweaks here because it's just a huge deal breaker for me. I cannot stand the comfort on these for longer than 30 minutes. So, what did I miss out here? Yeah, definitely a headphone I find hard to put down for the first 30 minutes. And then I find it really, really easy to put down. So, thank you for watching this. I hope it helped. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, everything. Put it down below. You know what to do. Go ahead and ask me questions about these if you feel like it. Stay tuned for the HD600 comparison and the HD800 comparisons as well. Yeah, that's all I really have to say about these. Au revoir, I guess.